I used to believe that betrayal was something distant, something that happened in other people's lives, the kind of story you hear about, shake your head at, and then move on without thinking it could ever touch you. Because when your life feels stable and your relationships feel real, you convince yourself that you're somehow protected from that kind of pain. I was wrong. I met my wife when I was still figuring out who I was, at a time when everything felt uncertain and messy, and she was the one person who made things feel simple. Like no matter how chaotic the world got, there was always this one place where I could breathe, where I could be understood without having to explain myself. And over time, that feeling turned into something deeper, something that felt permanent. We built a life together step by step, not in some dramatic movie-like way, but in small, everyday moments that slowly became our reality. Like cooking dinner together after long days, falling asleep on the couch with the TV still on, arguing about stupid things, and then laughing about them an hour later. And all those little things added up to something that felt unbreakable. And my best friend was part of that life too. I had known him longer than I had known her. We grew up together, went through the same phases, made the same mistakes, and there was this unspoken understanding between us that no matter what happened, we would always be on the same side. Because that's what friendship like that is supposed to be. It's not just about having fun, it's about trust, about loyalty, about knowing that this person would never cross a line that could destroy everything. He was around a lot, which never felt strange to me, because he was practically family. The kind of guy who could just walk into my house without knocking, grab something from the fridge, sit down like he belonged there, and for the longest time, I didn't question that. Because why would I, when the two people I trusted the most in the world were right there in front of me, acting like everything was normal? Looking back now, I can see the signs, but at the time, they were so small and so easy to ignore that my brain just brushed them aside without even thinking twice. Like the way she would laugh a little harder at his jokes than she did at mine, or the way their conversations sometimes felt just a bit too private even when I was sitting right there with them, or how there were moments when I would walk into a room and they would suddenly go quiet, as if I had interrupted something I wasn't supposed to hear. At first, I told myself I was imagining things, because when you trust someone completely, your mind doesn't want to accept anything that could threaten that trust. So instead of questioning it, you explain it away. You create reasons that make everything feel normal again, because the alternative is too uncomfortable to even consider. But the feeling didn't go away. It stayed there in the background, subtle but persistent. Like something was slightly off, and I just couldn't fully understand what it was. And the more I tried to ignore it, the more it started to grow, turning into this quiet tension that I carried with me, even during the most ordinary moments. There was one night that I keep replaying in my head, because now I realize it was the moment when everything had already crossed a line, even if I didn't know it yet, and we were all sitting together, just talking, nothing unusual. But there was this look they shared, just for a second. Something quick and almost invisible, but it felt too intimate, too familiar, like something that didn't belong in that space. And that was the first time I felt something close to fear. Not a loud, obvious fear, but something quieter, something deeper. Like a realization that maybe I didn't fully understand what was happening around me, and that scared me more than anything else, because it meant I wasn't in control of my own reality anymore. Still, I didn't confront them. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to be that guy, the paranoid husband who creates problems out of nothing, so I stayed silent and hoped that whatever I was feeling would just disappear on its own. It didn't. Instead, things started to shift in ways that were impossible to ignore, like how she began to spend more time on her phone, smiling at messages she wouldn't show me, or how he started dropping by more often when he knew I might not be home. And every time I noticed something like that, I felt this mix of confusion and denial, because part of me was starting to see the truth, while another part was desperately trying to hold on to the version of reality where everything was still okay. The breaking point came on a day that started like any other, completely normal, nothing unusual, nothing that would suggest that my life was about to change in a way I could never undo. I left work earlier than expected, thinking it might actually be a good thing, like I could surprise her. Maybe we could spend some time together, do something simple, something normal, and I remember even feeling a little excited about it, which now feels almost cruel, considering what I walked into just a short time later. When I got home, the first thing I noticed was how quiet everything was. And it wasn't the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the kind that feels wrong, like something is missing or out of place. And that feeling hit me immediately, even before I had any real reason to be suspicious. I stepped inside, called her name, and when there was no answer, I felt that same tension come back, stronger this time, more direct, like it was trying to warn me that something wasn't right. Then I heard it, a sound from upstairs, movement, and something else, a voice, a man's voice. And the moment I recognized it, everything inside me dropped, because it was him, my best friend. The moment I recognized his voice, it felt like something inside my chest just collapsed, like all the air had been pulled out of my lungs at once, and for a second, I couldn't even move, because my brain was still trying to catch up with what my ears had already understood, desperately searching for any explanation that would make this make sense, any version of reality where this wasn't exactly what it sounded like. But there was no other explanation, not one that didn't already feel like a lie. I stood there at the bottom of the stairs longer than I want to admit, completely frozen, listening to the sounds coming from upstairs, trying to convince myself that if I just waited a little longer, something would change, something would prove me wrong, but instead, every second only made things clearer, sharper, more undeniable. And then I started walking. Slowly at first, like each step required a conscious decision, like my body didn't want to go where my mind already knew I had to. Because there's a part of you that understands that once you see the truth, there's no going back, no undoing it, no pretending you didn't know. Halfway up the stairs, I already felt sick. Not just emotionally, but physically. Like my body was reacting to something it couldn't process, something it wasn't built to handle. Because betrayal like that doesn't just stay in your head. It hits you everywhere at once. Your chest, your stomach, your throat, until it feels like you're barely holding yourself together. The door to the bedroom wasn't fully closed. It was slightly open, just enough. And in that moment, I realized something that still messes with me to this day, because a part of me believes that if that door had been completely shut, I might have turned around. I might have walked away. I might have chosen not to see what was on the other side, but the fact that it was open, even just a little, felt like there was no choice anymore. So I pushed it. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough to see. And everything stopped. Not in reality, but inside me. Because what I saw wasn't chaos or panic or some one-time mistake that had spiraled out of control. It was calm. It was familiar. It was comfortable in a way that made it 1,000 times worse. Because it told me immediately that this wasn't new. This wasn't something that had just happened. This was something that had been going on long enough for them to feel normal in it. For a second, none of us moved. It was like time had stretched out. Like those few seconds were longer than anything I had ever experienced. And in that silence, everything became painfully clear without anyone needing to say a single word. She was the first to react. Her face changed so quickly that it almost didn't feel real, like watching someone switch between two completely different people in an instant, going from relaxed and comfortable to shocked and terrified. And in her eyes, I saw something that hurt more than anything else, because it wasn't just guilt. It was fear of being caught. Not regret, not sorrow, just fear. And that told me everything I needed to know. He didn't say anything at all. My best friend, the guy I had trusted for years, the person I would have defended without hesitation, just stood there, frozen, looking at me like he didn't even recognize the situation he was in, like he hadn't fully understood what he had done until that exact moment when I was standing in front of him. I didn't feel anger, at least not right away. What I felt was something colder, something heavier, like everything inside me had just shut down at once, because the truth was too big, too overwhelming to process in real time. So instead of reacting, I just stood there, taking it in, letting it sink in piece by piece in the most painful way possible. She started talking. Of course she did. Words came out fast, messy, overlapping, trying to explain, trying to justify, trying to reshape reality into something that wasn't completely broken. But I didn't hear most of it. Because once you see something like that, words lose their meaning. They stop mattering. Because nothing anyone can say will ever match what you've already seen with your own eyes. It's not what it looks like. That's what she said. And I remember thinking how insane that sounded. Because there are situations in life where things can be misunderstood, where context matters, where explanations can change everything. But this wasn't one of those situations. This was as clear as it gets, as undeniable as it gets. And hearing her say that only made it worse. Because it meant she thought I was stupid. Or maybe she just didn't know what else to say. I looked at him, and that was the moment something shifted. Because out of everything that was happening, everything that was falling apart in front of me, the part that hurt the most wasn't even her. It was him. Because she had promised loyalty, but he had chosen betrayal. And there's a difference, a huge one. I took a step back. Not out of fear, not because I didn't know what to do, but because I realized that staying there, even for another second, was only going to make things worse. Not for them, but for me. Because I could already feel something building inside me. Something dark. Something that I didn't want to lose control over. So I turned around, and I walked out. Again. No shouting. No confrontation. Just silence. But this time, that silence felt different. It wasn't empty. It was heavy. Final. Like something had ended in a way that could never be undone. I got into my car and just sat there for a while, staring straight ahead without really seeing anything, because my mind was trying to process what had just happened, replaying it over and over again, as if somehow repeating it would make it easier to understand, easier to accept. It didn't. If anything, it only made it worse. Because every time I replayed it, I noticed something new, some detail I hadn't fully processed in the moment, some expression, some movement, something that made it even more clear how deep this actually went. And that's when the questions started. Not small ones, big ones. How long had this been going on? How many times had they been together while I had no idea? How many moments in my life, moments I thought were real, were actually built on something completely fake? And the worst question of all, how close had I been to the truth without ever seeing it? I don't know how long I sat in that car, because time stopped making sense the moment I walked out of that house, and everything after that felt disconnected, like I was watching my own life from a distance instead of actually living it. Because when something like that happens, your mind doesn't process it in a straight line. It loops, it jumps, it repeats the same moments over and over again until you feel like you're stuck inside them. At some point, I realized I was gripping the steering wheel so hard that my hands were starting to hurt. And that was the first physical thing that pulled me back into reality. Because up until then, everything felt numb, distant, almost unreal. Like I could wake up at any moment and none of it would have happened. But it had. And no matter how much I wanted to deny it, there was no version of this where it wasn't real. I started the engine, not because I knew where I was going, but because sitting there any longer felt unbearable. Like if I didn't move, I would suffocate under the weight of everything that had just happened. So I drove without thinking, without a plan, just letting instinct take over, while my mind was still trying to catch up. The first call came sooner than I expected. Her name lit up on the screen, and for a moment, I just stared at it, watching it ring, feeling this strange mix of emotions that I couldn't fully separate, because part of me wanted answers. Part of me wanted to hear what she had to say, but a bigger part of me already knew that nothing she said would change anything. I didn't answer. Not the first time. Not the second. But she kept calling. Over and over again. And eventually, I picked up. Not because I was ready to talk, but because I wanted to hear how she was going to explain something that didn't have an explanation. Her voice was shaking. Not slightly. Really shaking. And for a second, if I didn't know what I knew, I might have thought she was the victim in all of this, because that's how convincing it sounded. Like she was the one who had just lost everything. Like she was the one in pain. I can explain, she said. And there it was again. That same sentence. The same attempt to reshape reality into something softer. Something less brutal than what it actually was. I didn't say anything at first. I just listened. Because sometimes silence forces people to reveal more than questions ever could. She started talking fast, jumping from one point to another, trying to build a story that made sense. But the more she spoke, the more it fell apart. Because when the truth is simple and the explanation is complicated, you already know which one is real. She said it didn't mean anything. She said it was a mistake. She said it just happened. And every word made it worse. Because there are mistakes. And then there are choices. And what I saw upstairs wasn't a mistake. It was a series of decisions. Repeated. Hidden. Protected. I asked her one question. Just one. How long? There was a pause. A long one. And in that pause, I got my answer before she even said anything. Because silence like that doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from calculation. From deciding how much of the truth to reveal, without completely destroying what little is left. A few weeks, she said. And I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so obviously not the truth that it felt insulting. Like she thought I was still the same person I was an hour ago. The same person who trusted her, who believed her without question. I didn't argue. I didn't push. I just said, "Don't lie to me again." And then there was another silence. Different this time. Heavier. Because now she understood that whatever version of the story she had prepared wasn't going to work anymore. "A few months," she said quietly. And that hit differently, because weeks could still be framed as a mistake. But months meant something else entirely. Months meant planning. It meant opportunity. It meant that while I was living my life, trusting both of them, they were building something behind my back. Something that required time, effort, and the willingness to keep lying every single day. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to process that. Trying to understand how something like that could exist right in front of me without me seeing it. And then I asked the question I didn't want to ask. Where? Another pause, but shorter this time, because once the truth starts coming out, it becomes harder to stop it. "Here," she said, and that was it. That was the moment something inside me finally broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Because it wasn't just that she had betrayed me. It was where? Our house. Our space. The place that was supposed to be safe, private, ours. And they had turned it into something else entirely. Something fake. Something contaminated with lies. I ended the call without saying anything else. Not because I didn't have more questions, but because I already had enough answers to understand everything that mattered. And continuing that conversation would only drag me deeper into something I didn't want to be part of anymore. A few minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was him. I stared at his name on the screen longer than I had stared at hers, because this call felt different, heavier in a way I couldn't fully explain. Like this was the moment where something final would be said, something that would define everything that came after. I almost didn't answer, but I did, and for a second, neither of us spoke. Because what do you even say in a moment like that? How do you start a conversation that should never have needed to happen? He took a breath. I messed up, he said. Simple, direct, almost calm. And that made it worse, because it sounded like he was talking about something small, something fixable, something that could be moved past with the right words and enough time. I didn't respond. I just waited, and he kept talking, saying he didn't plan it, saying it just happened, saying he didn't want to hurt me, and every sentence sounded more empty than the last, because intent doesn't erase action, and regret doesn't undo betrayal, especially when it's repeated over months. Then he said something that I'll never forget. I didn't think you'd find out like this. And in that moment, everything became even clearer than it already was. Because that sentence wasn't about guilt. It was about getting caught. It wasn't about what he did. It was about how it ended. And that told me more about him than anything else he could have said. I finally spoke, and my voice didn't sound like mine. It was calm. Too calm. "Stay away from me," I said, and then I hung up. I didn't go back home that night, because the idea of walking into that house again, knowing exactly what had happened inside those walls, and how easily they had both chosen to turn something that was mine into something fake, made it physically impossible for me to even consider it. So instead, I kept driving until I ended up parked somewhere I didn't even recognize, sitting in silence while everything finally started to settle into something clearer, colder, more controlled. At that point, the confusion was gone. The denial was gone. What was left was something sharper. Understanding. Because once the shock fades, you start connecting things fast. You start replaying conversations, moments, small details that didn't make sense before, but now fit together perfectly. And suddenly it becomes obvious that this didn't start recently. It didn't just happen. It had been building quietly, right in front of me, while I was trusting both of them, without question. The late replies, the random mentions of him, the times he showed up when I wasn't around, the looks, the silence when I entered a room, all of it lined up too cleanly to ignore anymore. And the more I thought about it, the more one realization kept hitting harder than the rest. Because it wasn't just that they had something behind my back. It was how comfortable they had become in it. How normal it must have felt for them to lie to me every single day, without hesitation. And that's when I made a decision. Not emotional, not impulsive. Cold. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. And I definitely wasn't going to give them the kind of reaction that would make them feel like they still had any control over me or over what happened next. I was going to see them, both of them, on my terms. I texted her first, short and direct, telling her to be at the house the next day and not to leave. No explanations, no questions, just that. And I knew she would listen, because at that point, fear was the only thing driving her actions, and fear makes people predictable. Then I texted him. Same message. No emotions, no details, just a time and a place. And for the first time since everything happened, I felt something close to control again. Not over what had already been done, but over what came next, and that mattered more than anything else. The next day, when I walked into the house, they were both already there, sitting in the same room, waiting. And the moment I saw them like that, together, but now completely different from what I had seen before, tense, uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact, I realized something important. Because whatever they had between them, whatever they thought was worth risking everything for, it didn't look strong anymore. It didn't look real anymore. It looked fragile, temporary, like something that only existed in secrecy. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I walked in, closed the door behind me, and just stood there for a second, letting the silence do what it does best. Because silence in moments like that forces people to sit with what they've done instead of hiding behind words. She tried to speak first. Of course she did. Trying to explain again, trying to control the situation, trying to rebuild something that was already gone. But this time I didn't even let her finish, because I wasn't there to listen. I was there to end it. I looked at him first. Not her. Him. Because he was the one who had a choice from the very beginning and still decided to cross that line anyway. How many times? I asked. No emotion, no hesitation, just the question. He didn't answer immediately, and that was all I needed to see. Because hesitation like that doesn't come from confusion. It comes from knowing the truth is worse than anything you're willing to say out loud. Enough, he finally said. And that one word told me more than any number ever could. I nodded slightly, like I expected that answer, because at that point, nothing they said could shock me anymore. Not after what I had already seen, and what I had already figured out on my own. Then I looked at her. And for a moment, she couldn't even meet my eyes. That alone said everything. Was it ever real? I asked. And this time the question wasn't about details or timelines. It was about everything. About whether anything we had built actually meant something, or if it had all been slowly replaced by something else while I wasn't paying attention. She started crying, but I didn't react. Because tears don't equal truth, and they definitely don't erase months of lying. I don't know, she said. And that was it. That was the final answer. Because I don't know doesn't come from someone who lost something real. It comes from someone who already let it go long before it ended. I took a breath, slow, controlled, and for the first time since all of this started, I felt completely clear. No anger clouding my judgment, no confusion holding me back, just a simple understanding of what needed to happen next. You're both out, I said. No explanation, no argument, just a statement. She tried to protest, saying we needed to talk, saying we could fix it, saying everything people say when they realize they've lost control of a situation they thought they were managing. But I didn't respond, because there was nothing left to discuss. He didn't say anything at all. And honestly, that was the only pravilna reaxia he could have had, because there are situations where words only make things worse, and this was one of them. I stepped aside, giving them space to move, not out of kindness, but because I didn't want them near me anymore. Not in that house, not in that life, not in anything that had my name attached to it. And as they started gathering their things in silence, avoiding each other just as much as they were avoiding me, I saw it clearly for what it was. Not some deep connection, not something worth destroying everything for. Just two people who made the same selfish choice and now had to live with it. And the moment they walked out that door, I knew one thing for sure. I didn't lose them. They lost me. The house felt different the moment they left. Not quieter, not emptier, but cleaner. In a way that's hard to explain unless you've experienced something like that. Because it wasn't about the absence of people. It was about the absence of lies. And for the first time in a long time, I could stand in my own space, without feeling like something was off, like something was happening behind my back. I didn't chase them. I didn't check where they went. And I didn't care. Because once you see people clearly for who they are, not who you thought they were, something shifts permanently, and you stop looking for answers in places that only ever gave you deception. The next few days were simple and brutal at the same time, because there's no dramatic music, no big turning point, just you waking up and remembering everything all over again. But each time it hits a little differently. Less shock, more clarity, less emotion, more control. And that's the part no one talks about. How pain slowly turns into something useful if you don't let it break you first. I changed everything fast. Not because I was trying to run away from what happened, but because staying the same would mean I hadn't learned anything from it. So I cut off every connection that led back to them, blocked numbers, removed photos, got rid of anything that carried their presence into my space. And I did it without hesitation, because hesitation is what keeps people stuck in situations they already know are wrong. A week later, he tried to reach out again. Different number, short message. Saying we should talk, saying he wanted to explain, saying things that might have worked before, but meant nothing now. Because explanations after betrayal are never about truth. They're about easing guilt. And I had no interest in helping him feel better about what he chose to do. I didn't reply. Not a word. And that silence was stronger than anything I could have said because it made one thing clear. He no longer had access to me. Not to my time, not to my attention, not to anything. She tried too. Long messages, apologies, memories, promises. Everything people use when they realize too late that they destroyed something real. But the problem with regret is that it only shows up after the damage is already done. And by then, it doesn't fix anything. It just proves that they understood what they were doing all along. I read one message. Just one. And then I deleted the rest without opening them, because I didn't need more words. I already had the truth, and no version of her explanation was going to change what I saw with my own eyes. A month passed, then 2, and something interesting happened. They disappeared. Not physically, but from my mind. Because at first you think you'll carry that anger forever, that it will stay sharp and present every day. But if you handle it right, if you don't feed it, it fades. Not completely, but enough that it stops controlling you. And that's when you realize you've moved past something that once felt impossible to survive. I heard about them eventually. Not from them, from someone else. And it was exactly what I expected. They didn't last. Of course they didn't. Because things built on betrayal don't suddenly turn into something stable. Just because the secret is gone, they collapse under the same lack of trust that created them in the first place. And apparently, that's exactly what happened. Arguments, accusations, suspicion, until whatever they thought they had completely fell apart. And when I heard that, I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel revenge. I felt nothing. Because by that point, they didn't matter enough to trigger any kind of reaction. And that's the real ending people don't expect. Not anger, not revenge, just indifference. Looking back now, I understand something I didn't see before. Because I used to think losing them was the worst possible outcome. But the truth is, keeping people like that in your life is worse than losing them. Because betrayal like that doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from who they really are, when no one is watching. And now I know. Trust isn't about how long you've known someone. It's about what they choose to do when they have the chance to destroy you. And both of them made that choice. So I made mine. I walked away, and I never looked back.